It's Friday, Friday, gotta get down on Friday. Everybody's looking forward to the weekend Friday.
This is Ken Lathrop from Coffee Crafters, and welcome to another segment to the Friday Show. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite drugs, caffeine. Caffeine is occurring in about 60 plants naturally, and they actually used to harvest caffeine from tea leaves to put in other products. I didn't realize that they put caffeine in so many different products, even jerky. But today we're not here to talk about jerky, we're here to talk about coffee. So one of the myths that I saw in the whole caffeine issue with dark and light roast is kind of what we're here to talk about today, is that dark roast coffee has less caffeine than light roast coffee. Now I've been repeating that ever since I read it years ago. In part, it's true, but what I found out about caffeine and coffee roasting really surprised me, and I went to thecoffeechemist.com to find this out and then verified it with some other sources. Caffeine is a white powder. If you break it down into its natural state, it's a white crystalline powder. And it off-gases when it reaches a temperature of 352 degrees, which they call sublimation. So it's kind of like dry ice, right? You know, it starts evaporating. What I didn't realize, though, is that it off-gases very, very slowly. So I even used to surmise that fluid bed roasting probably had more caffeine for the same degree of roast than drum roasted coffee, because fluid bed roasted coffee roasts a little faster. And as I found out, that's kind of not true. So how much caffeine off-gases when you're roasting? If we were to take 100 beans of the exact same size and roast the first 100 beans to a light roast, the second 100 beans to a dark roast, the light roasted coffee would have slightly more caffeine than the dark roasted. But if I was to add one more bean to the pile of dark roasted coffee, it would have more caffeine. So what does that mean? Well, what that means when we're talking about caffeine and dark roast coffee, if you're brewing the same volume amount, like you might with your scoop of coffee as you're roasting your coffee at home, your light roasted coffee might have slightly more caffeine, but very, very slightly. But if you're doing it by weight, like you have a frac pack with 2.5 ounces of coffee, the dark roasted coffee in the frac pack actually has more caffeine than the light roasted coffee in the frac pack. So we lose, less than 1%. It's like a little tiny percent of 1% of the caffeine through sublimation. But we lose a lot more weight in the coffee, and it expands in size. So it takes a lot more coffee beans to make a pound of dark roasted coffee than it does light roasted coffee. And that was very surprising. So I'm going to stop telling people that light roasted coffee has more caffeine, because it really depends, doesn't it? It can have more caffeine if it was equal to equal, but it almost never is, because coffee gets sold by the pound, it gets sold by weight. To make it even more complicated, if you look at the different types of beans, Arabica beans have about 1.2% caffeine, where Robusta beans have 2.2, almost double. So if you're doing a blend of coffee, like a lot of people do with their espresso blend, they'll put a certain amount of Robusta beans in there, it would have a lot more coffee, or a lot more caffeine than the darker roast coffee. So now you know a little bit more about caffeine than you did. I'm certainly surprised, and so we'll probably not tell people as much about how dark roasted coffee has so much less caffeine, because it doesn't have so much less. If you happen to take caffeine to the melting point, which is I think close to 500 degrees, actually your coffee would burst into flames. Yeah, then it will off-gas a lot faster, but other than that, that's the scoop on caffeine. This is Ken Lathrop from Coffee Crafters. This was another segment of the Friday Show. If you have an idea you'd like us to research, you can email me at ken@coffeecrafters.com, and thanks for watching.